Hey everyone, just a reminder, this is the last episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast of 2020. We've got some episodes coming up in the coming weeks. If you don't want to miss any of them, please push subscribe and they'll be sent directly to your listening device. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome to the final episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. This is it for 2020. It's been a great year. Chris and I will look back a little bit at the end of this episode, but I want to let you know we are delivering a jam-packed episode today. We're going to speak with folks who are bringing you the vaccine. That's right. Happy Vaccine Week. We open up with Chris's interview with Elizabeth Woody. She's the Senior Vice President of Public Affairs at BD. BD, of course, has a leading role in creating syringes. Next up, I'll speak with Claudia. She is the Vice President of Life Sciences and Healthcare at DHL. She'll talk about how DHL is shipping the vaccine across the world. And finally, I had the chance to speak with Eric Eskioğlu. Eric Eskioğlu is the Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at Novant Health. Dr. Eskioğlu talked to us about the vaccinations they started just yesterday on Thursday of their doctors and nurses. It was a very emotional day. And now we're joined by my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, the executive editor of Life Science at Mass Device, and for the first time, Brian Buntz, pharma editor. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be here, Tom.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Brian, you joined us just a few months ago. Tell our folks a little bit about you. I know you're a medtech person. I think by and large, you've been covering medtech for a while. Now you're doing our pharma sites. Where did you come to us from?
Well, I started out in 2005 writing about the European medical device industry for a company called Canon Communications. Covered a range of different topics there, from biomaterials to drug delivery to venture capital funding, cybersecurity, and then moved through the ranks at Canon Communications, and eventually became part of UBM, worked with Chris for a couple of years. And then after that, I worked for a company called Penton, which got acquired by Informa. Covered IoT in that kind of space for a little bit. And then in October, I joined to cover pharma. So it's somewhat of a new beat, but I've covered some aspects of it before. So looking to dig in my heels and learn more.
It's the amazing thing about the content business. You can have the same job and work for 4 or 5 different companies after you've been bought and sold so many times. I know that's that's happened to me. My LinkedIn page is largely reflecting the number of times I've been bought, not the number of jobs I've switched.
Yeah, the crazy M&A world of trade media is crazy.
Anyway, we as I said up top, we have a full day today, a full package of podcast offerings for our listeners. So, Chris Newmarker, how do we want to start? Do we want to start with a top 10? We're going to change up the
Newmarker's Newsmakers.
That's right. We're going to change it up. We're going to give you the top 10 list of news items in 2020.
I guess it's the Newmarker's Newsmakers top 10.
Dun dun dun. All right, we'll just start and get into number 10.
All right. Well, let's start at number 10. I mean, we had Boston Sci this year. They said that they were discontinuing their Lotus TAVR device program, and they're going to be instead focusing on a new TAVR product for the future. So I mean, this was big news in the TAVR space. Boston Sci really kind of like ceding ground, for now to Edwards and Medtronic, which have really dominated the space in the U.S. So that's number 10.
That was certainly big news for sure. What do we have at number 9, Chris?
Well, number 9, I mean, one of the things that we saw as the COVID-19 pandemic ramped up was that FDA issued temporary guidance saying, you can remotely monitor hospital patients, in order to limit, contact with hospital staff. And one of the things that allowed was, the use of continuous glucose monitors in hospitals. These are devices made by companies such as Dexcom and Abbott. And, this move, it appears to have opened up an entirely new market for CGMs. And, it kind of makes sense. If you're in the hospital and you have diabetes, in the past, you've, constantly had nurses coming in to check your, or other staff coming in to check your blood sugar, and just having a CGM on and being able to, broadcast that data seems to make a lot of sense. So it'll be really interesting to see if this, sticks after the pandemic, lifts. So number 8 on the list is has been like the need for medtech sales reps to go remote during the pandemic. And Tom, you've written a lot about this. I mean, tell us some more about what's going on with that.
Yeah, this is a really interesting development. I mean, you have a lot of the big startup companies like Explorer and Avail and a lot of the larger medtech companies that are saying they need to have these remote connections in the OR because they can't get sales reps in there either because of the fear of infection or because there's just, with all the ambulatory surgery centers, there's just a lot of territory to cover. So there certainly is a great opportunity for these companies to connect surgeons with medical sales reps, but we're also seeing a lot of pushback from sales reps, especially in orthopedics, saying, no, they're still essential. And we had Spencer Stiles on from Stryker a couple of weeks ago saying that they tried the remote thing and it didn't work and they need to have their sales reps in the OR. So it's going to be interesting to see whether this becomes one of those post-COVID things that sticks or something we look back at and say, oh yeah, remember when we thought that would be the future of medtech. So certainly bears watching.
I was going to say on the manufacturing side, I've heard of some companies that are trying to get around that same hurdle by using augmented reality. So you have like a component that breaks or what have you, and then you have somebody puts on an AR headset, they're able to communicate with a colleague or with an expert. And it's different than the OR example, but it's that same basic hurdle of you can't get people who are qualified into facility.
Yeah.
I wonder if that will be a trend that we'll see more of. I know AR is kind of like a new technology, but it seems like it's a good kind of case for it that if you can't get workers in, you could use that to give kind of superpowers to the ones you can get in.
Yeah, they're like Bob and Martha isn't around the plant today, so like let's get them on a AR headset, have them help us out, like, or whatever. It's pretty cool. So number 7 on the list was we had Bayer in August announcing that it was settling 90% of Escher claims for $1.6 billion, and the Escher birth control device. I mean, that's arguably been one of medtech's greatest failures over the past decade or so, with countless women saying that they've experienced adverse health conditions from the device. So hopefully this is the the beginning of the end with this story, but definitely big news when it comes to Bayer and Escher this year.
Yeah, it'll be great to sort of close the chapter on those tragedies that really rolled out in that Netflix film, The Bleeding Edge. I know that knocked a lot of people over and upset a lot of folks, and there's a lot of things that hopefully we'll be able to move on from. But now let's get into our first conversation. Chris, you actually led this conversation up. Tell us who you talked to.
Yeah, I talked to Elizabeth Woody, who's a head of public affairs at BD, and It was interesting because, everybody's excited about the vaccines right now. There's a lot of hopes around it, but I mean, if you're going to deliver vaccines to people, you need syringes and needles. And one of the, companies really in the middle of that is BD. So, I had a good conversation with Elizabeth about, what the company's been having to do in order to, get syringes where they need to go in order to help with the pandemic. And actually, since I spoke with her, BD says their orders with governments around the world have surpassed 1 billion. So, I mean, it's just a huge task that they're facing right now.
Brian, you're editing our pharma sites. You've been following the vaccine rollout story closely. You sat through the FDA meeting last week. What are some takeaways? What are some things that you've noticed, and maybe some things that we're not talking about that we should be?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things from the meeting with Pfizer and BioNTech last week with the FDA advisory panel was you had a series of patient advocates that went on kind of early in the day. And I think some of them voiced the kind of grounded concerns you have where you have a new vaccine that's being developed in rapid timeframes, but you also had some people that were kind of almost scaremongering, saying things that were not totally factually accurate. There was somebody who spoke about saying that the Pfizer vaccine used fetal stem cells, which is not true, in the development of it. And I think that's been debunked, but you had some kind of scaremongering type of information mixed in with everything else. And I think when you look at what experts expect in terms of stopping the pandemic, if you have to have 58 to 94% of the population vaccinated, according to an estimate as well from McKinsey, I think if you have people that are kind of scaremongering, it's going to be a challenge to even get to that kind of like the lower end of that scale. It's a topic to watch, I guess, as we move into the new year. But
I mean, right now there are people drinking beers in bars in Minnesota without masks, like defying the governor's order. So I mean, yeah, are they going to take a vaccine? I mean, it's it's definitely seems like a challenge.
Good thoughts all around, or at least important ones. I don't know if they're good or the kinds that make you feel comfortable. But let's now get into the conversation, Chris, that you had with Elizabeth Woody. She's the Senior Vice President of Public Affairs at BD.
Well, I'm joined here today by Elizabeth Woody, Senior Vice President of Public Affairs at BD. Elizabeth, welcome to DeviceTalks Weekly.
Thanks, Chris. Glad to join you.
Well, we're talking today on Monday this week, and just on late on Friday, we had the FDA gave authorization to Pfizer's COVID vaccine. So we've got our first COVID vaccine authorized in the U.S. I know the reports I've been reading is that it's shipping out as we speak. But I mean, tell me, what role is BD playing in this?
Yeah, so, one of the critical elements to delivering a vaccine, of course, are the injection devices that are required to actually get the vaccine into someone's body. And,
that would help, yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't drink it or rub it on. Yeah. So we do need needles and syringes to administer the vaccine. And fortunately, this is a space that BD knows well. Drug delivery devices are really the foundation of our company. And we have a long history in supporting global immunization campaigns. And quite frankly, Chris, we've been planning for this kind of event for the last 10 years, ever since the H1N1 pandemic gave us a little bit of a dry run. We learned a lot of lessons from that experience that we're definitely applying now. We didn't know then that we were preparing for coronavirus, but we did know that we needed to take some more steps to be prepared for a full-fledged pandemic like the one we find ourselves in now.
Right. I mean, we've had huge pandemics in the past, so it would make sense to what kind of lessons did you learn from H1N1 that are helping you out now?
Sure. So I would start by saying that early planning and preparation are just critical, right? And we've been working with governments across the globe to pre-position needles and syringes so that when a vaccine or vaccines become available, we had the drug delivery devices in place in order to ensure that the vaccine could be administered. So, as I said, been working with governments on that planning process, and we've also been ramping up our manufacturing capacity to keep up with not only the demand for injection devices for coronavirus, but also to continue to support flu immunization as well as annual childhood immunizations. So we have to make sure we're keeping that balance in mind.
Totally. I mean, I know in BD's recent earnings call, just some numbers that really stuck out to me was that your top executives were saying that you've got production orders for over 800 million needles and syringes to deliver COVID vaccines, and at the same time, BD recently announced that you're putting $1.2 billion into drug delivery plant expansions. So I mean, those kinds of figures just tell me this is this isn't a small little effort going on here.
No, and maybe just to put a fine point on that, we manufacture both standard needle and syringe, which is used to draw up the vaccine from a vial, as well as pre-filled needles and syringes, which we provide to pharma companies, and they fill those glass syringes with the vaccine so that it's ready to administer. So that recent investment of $1.2 billion that you referenced, that was around manufacturing capacity for those pre-filled syringes.
Wow.
But we really see, the need for kind of this whole continuum of injection devices. At first, what we understand from our pharma partners is that they're going to put the vaccine in multi-dose vials, right? So you'll need those needles and syringes to draw the vaccine up from the vial. But as more is known about the properties of the vaccine, I think we'll see a movement to put them in pre-filled syringes, which help to expedite, the administration process, right? That's kind of longer term, right? As we look beyond the initial doses of the vaccine to, into next year and beyond, where we might have more of a regular immunization effort like we do with flu.
What we got right now is the Pfizer vaccine. It needs to be kept super cold. Is there any technological challenges you've had to think of with with the syringes when you're drawing out something that had to be kept on dry ice, basically, like in Antarctic temperatures?
Not from a needle and syringe perspective, but I do know that the pharma companies and our distribution partners that are moving the product across the country have been taking all of those necessary steps to make sure that the temperature control is sufficient so that when it does come time for administration, there are no issues with that.
I mean, syringe technology, it's been around since the early 1800s. Is it easy to ramp up production? Is it easy to get new lines going? I mean, what has to go into making sure that these are safe, reliable syringes for delivering vaccines?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'll point to here is that we actually are partnering with the U.S. government to bring on some additional manufacturing lines at our facility in Nebraska. That is something we announced a few months ago, and it does take quite a bit of time to set those lines up and get them running, right? You need the equipment to establish the lines. Fortunately, we have the space in Nebraska. We're not needing to build a new facility, but just, there is a lot of engineering behind a plastic molded syringe and the needle on the end. That may not seem obvious, but it is pretty intense engineering feat to deliver those products, particularly at the scale that we do. So again, back to the investment in Nebraska, as I said, we announced that a couple months ago, and we expect those additional 3 lines to be up and running this summer. So it does take, 9 to 12 months to really establish a new line. So in order to meet the current demand that we're seeing, we're really leveraging our global manufacturing infrastructure that we currently have as we think about, the additional capacity coming online this summer. And then again, obviously we talked about our investment on the pre-filled side, really making sure that we're leveraging all those capabilities to support delivering as many doses as possible.
Tell me a little bit more about those, engineering, challenges, because many of our listeners are engineers. But what would be something that I know might not be intuitive that goes into making sure these syringes are effective.
First you have to have the raw materials, right, to mold the plastic into a syringe. I think one of the things that your listeners might find interesting is, in the state of Nebraska, where we manufacture a number of these products, we're actually one of the largest consumers of energy because the process of actually molding the syringe is so energy intensive, right? And then, as I said, you need cannula. So you need the steel to form the cannula, that is the needle on the end of the syringe. So it's a bit of a 2-step process there. And then, you have to have the product go through a quality control process to ensure that, there were no hiccups along the manufacturing process. But I think, you pointed out that these technologies have been around for a while. And that's really where I think BD's expertise, really stands out, because we do have a reliability. I think that's second to none in our supply chain. We know how to manufacture needles and syringes. We've been doing it for a long time, and we've really perfected the process. So, we're confident in the volumes that we've committed to based on that long track record.
Wow. How do you make sure that, there's enough syringes wherever, the vaccine is going?
Yeah, so that's really where the partnership with governments has been critical, right? So, in the U.S., for example, we've been speaking with the team at HHS and BARDA for a number of months to understand how they were thinking about the vaccine, right? And so, their plan from a federal government perspective was to secure enough doses of the vaccine to vaccinate the entire population, planning on an initial injection and then a booster shot. So if you think of, a population of roughly, 330 to 350 million people times two, you're in the ballpark of 700 million needles and syringes. And we've seen that same kind of scenario play out with other governments, the UK, for example, planning to vaccinate its entire population. So obviously that dialogue with governments is just been critical to informing, the volumes that we are planning for to support this effort.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting over the weekend. I heard on NPR there was a UPS official saying that they could track real time where the Pfizer coolers were going around the United States. But so I guess kind of the partnerships with government are kind of saying, hey, we're going to be shipping 1 million to this state. Make sure that your supplies are basically backing that up. Am I kind of hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I think there is a huge logistical effort behind all this, right? And the Operation Warp Speed team has been working obviously with vaccine manufacturers, ourselves, distributors, to make sure that the necessary plans are in place. You've probably seen that the federal government has partnered with McKesson to help distribute a lot of the supplies that will be needed to administer the vaccine, and our needles and syringes are in that mix. So for us, the way it's working is that we're shipping the volume of products that the government has purchased from us to that central McKesson site, and they're preparing the kits that they're then sending out either in parallel with the vaccine, or in the case of the Pfizer vaccine, the kits are going separate from the vaccine, given the cold chain storage issues that we touched on earlier.
We've talked a lot about syringes, but I know, BD is, a huge corporation doing many things. Anything else, that would be good to mention about, BD's, efforts that BD is making to help, manage this deadly virus?
Yeah, sure. I think, I would start with our work in the diagnostic space, and really that, begins with tools to enable sample collection and transport. So swabs and transport media really are the tip of the spear. You've got to make sure you can actually collect the specimen in order to do the test. So in the early days, back at the beginning of the pandemic, we did a lot to ramp up the capacity and production of those tools.
I remember that, yeah.
So that was sort of, like I said, the tip of the spear for us. And then shortly after that, in early April, we got an emergency use authorization, actually 2 emergency use authorizations for tests on our PCR platform, our BD Max instrument. So, continuing to distribute thousands of tests to support diagnosis on that platform. And then in July, we got an emergency use authorization for our rapid antigen test on our BD Veritor point of care platform, which has been ramping up significantly. And you and your listeners have probably seen that we've been partnering with the federal government to make sure those technologies are in the hands of those who are caring for the most vulnerable. And we have a significant partnership with nursing homes across the country because that test can provide a result in 15 minutes. So really enabling decision-making right at the patient's bedside. So, that diagnostic space is one that's a tremendous focus for us, in addition to all the work on vaccine delivery.
How much has the historical nature of this sunk in, that just the efforts and the roles that you and your colleagues at your company are doing? How does that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've been with BD for almost 12 years now, and one of the reasons that I joined the company was because our technologies were so fundamental to the delivery of healthcare that there's hardly a public health issue out there that we don't care about or can't help address. And, that's more true today than it was 12 years ago. And, I think I speak on behalf of my colleagues and, the entire team at BD that, this is exactly where we want to be. We want to be part of helping to solve this challenge. And so I think, you've seen our teams around the world just doing incredible things, right? Developing technologies in record time, ramping up production, distributing products in ways that we never thought we would need to, really to meet this public health challenge. So I would say for our organization, it's incredibly energizing to be part of trying to solve this challenge. And, the historical piece of it, we'll look back on years from now, but, in kind of the moment that we're in, I think because it's so intense from a work perspective, it is just energizing to know that we're part of something bigger here, and we're committed to making that difference.
That's great. Any lessons you think that the company will learn, going forward? I mean, because it sounds like you're really like stretching your abilities right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things actually, even before the pandemic, we were really focused on becoming a more agile organization and trying to find ways to do that. And I think the pandemic has forced that agility on us, quite frankly. And BD is a 120-year-old company, right? So it can be hard to change processes and systems that are in place internally. But through the two large integrations we've done recently with CareFusion and Bard, I think we've brought on some new thinking into the organization. And then, like I said, times like this that are just, forcing us to be agile, we will learn some lessons. And I know we already have that we're applying to our future efforts.
That's great. Well, Elizabeth, thanks for joining us on DeviceTalks Weekly.
Thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure.
All right, Chris. Well, great job with the conversation with Elizabeth Woody. It sounds like BD is ready to produce more. And as you mentioned earlier on, they've got an order for how many worldwide?
More than 1 billion.
Well, that leaves us only another 6 billion to go, and then we'll get everybody in the world.
That's right.
Now you're starting to talk about a lot of syringes. Well, let's get back to the top 10 list. What do we have at number 6?
Carl Sagan would say billions and billions of syringes. Oh, man. So number 6 on the list is that, even here we are in the middle of this pandemic and recession, and, we're still seeing like a lot of medtech IPOs, M&A deals. I mean, stuff is happening. One story which got a lot of attention on Mass Device was Butterfly Network's plans to, go public through a, combination agreement with Longview Acquisition Corp. And they've got some pretty cool technology. It's like a transducer that uses semiconductor technology. It can perform a whole body imaging using a single handheld probe. So I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, some other notable IPOs included Outset Medical. I mean, they've got their all-in-one Tableau hemodialysis system, which is gaining a lot of interest because one of the big goals under the Trump administration was to get more dialysis moved into the home, and that there's so much of the wheels are rolling. I mean, it seems like something that'll continue into the new Biden administration. So yeah, that's also a popular technology. And then on the M&A side, I mean, we had the Stryker Wright Medical merger finally closed. Huge.
Finally.
Yeah, finally. Yeah, huge multi-billion-dollar merger. And another one we're waiting on to get complete is Siemens Healthineers acquisition of Varian medical systems, which promises to they're boasting this is going to create the most comprehensive cancer care portfolio in the industry. So here we've just got these giant multi-million-dollar IPOs going on. We've got like multi-billion-dollar M&A deals closing. So there's a lot of deals going on, and hopes for the future.
That's great. All right. And let's shift into number 5.
Number 5 was really just like kind of like the big shifts in regulatory and reimbursement that we saw during the pandemic. I mean, FDA issuing just so many, emergency use authorizations. I mean, it'll be, really interesting to see how, this, whether this easing of regulation, sticks around, as the pandemic, hopefully eases and the Biden administration, turns to its own priorities. In Europe, they got kind of a break. They got a delay in implementation of the medical device regulation, but, the deadlines are coming up now in 2021. So everybody's trying to get stuff done with that. And then on the reimbursement side, we had CMS agreeing to cover breakthrough medical devices. So that was a good news for the device industry on the reimbursement side. And and something I forgot to mention when we were talking about Bayer and Escher back too is that we're seeing a lot of Bayer isn't the only one. We're seeing tons and tons of legal settlements as well this year, like a lot of burying of the hatchet. So yeah, we'll just see if this climate continues on going forward.
I guess, Chris, one thing that I thought there is you have like this kind of loosening of HIPAA, and it's interesting to see if that will stick. Like if you have doctors now using platforms like Zoom that don't have kind of like medical grade privacy controls built in, but HIPAA give a waiver for doctors to use that. So we'll see kind of how things shift, I guess, in the new year. But if some of those restrictions for HIPAA will return, or if you'll see this kind of ongoing loosening.
Yeah, maybe there'll be some, pressure in Congress to, change the law as well, because people, if they're starting to tighten back up the restrictions after the pandemic, and people are like, wait a second, I like being able to, like Zoom with my doctor, when I had a sore throat or whatever, maybe we'll see like a change in, those restrictions as well. That's a really good point.
That is a great point. All right. Well, this is a good opportunity to take a pause from our top 10 list. We'll continue with that and with our own bold predictions for 2021. And now it is time for our second keynote conversation. I had the chance to speak with Claudia Roa. She is the Vice President, Life Science and Healthcare at DHL. Let's hear about DHL's efforts to get the vaccine shipped around the world. Well, Claudia Roa, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me.
So we don't talk a lot about the role that shippers have in medtech. So this is an exciting opportunity for me. We've been talking about the vaccine all week for obvious reasons. But first, let's just sort of step back and educate me a bit on how involved is DHL in shipping medtech equipment and working in healthcare and life sciences?
We've been involved in the life sciences and healthcare sector for more than 20 years. We've been building a very strong community of stakeholders within the organization that are specialized in this sector. We have more than 100 air freight competence centers. We have more than 150 GMP and GDP certified warehouses. We operate in more than 220 countries. And
wow.
Really the sector is focused on developing solutions, end-to-end solutions for the pharmaceutical and medical devices company. So you talk about the sector, but there's a lot behind the scenes that happens in terms of logistics.
I'm learning that, so this is great. So let's talk a little bit about this week. What has DHL's role been in the vaccine rollout, and what have you been doing to prepare for this much anticipated delivery?
We've been preparing for the vaccine distribution for the past 6 months. I mean, when the pandemic started and the companies started developing the vaccine, we realized it's going to be a huge challenge. Why? Because, the volumes are amazing. We have never seen anything like this. The expectation is that there will be more than 10 billion vaccines distributed worldwide to vaccinate at least 70% of the global population. So since then, we started preparing, talking to manufacturers, talking to governments, talking to NGOs, and we have a task force in place and different work streams, basically working on developing solutions to distribute the vaccines. These are new solutions, really, because the vaccines require, there are different types of vaccines, and all of these require different solutions because of the temperature requirements they have, right? So we will have to customize the solutions based on those requirements, and also based on each of the countries, because each government has a different vaccination plan.
Great point.
Each country has different infrastructure, so everything needs to be considered when shipping vaccines into each of the countries in the world.
So I understand you're not shipping within the U.S., you're shipping internationally. How can you, and I know you're not going to be able to mention companies that you're working with, but how many different countries are you shipping this vaccine to? Do you know off the top of your head?
Oh, we will be shipping to every country that we are required to, right? In the U.S., we're doing the outbound and inbound, not the domestic distribution, because that's, the government has chosen McKesson to do the distribution. And there's another company that decided to do it directly with some of our competitors. And we don't play a big role in the domestic distribution in the US, but we do a lot of international. So we're expecting to deliver to every country wherever needed, right? So we're on conversations with manufacturers and as I mentioned before, with governments and NGOs to support the vaccine distribution to wherever we need to go. And since we operate in almost every country in the world, we're ready to do it.
What preparations have you had to make in terms of, we hear about the freezers that are required, the temperatures for shipping? How much of an adjustment has that been for DHL to prepare for this particular shipment?
Yeah, as I was mentioning before, since we're developing these archetypes or logistics models, right, we need to identify where do we have gaps in terms of lack of infrastructure, where do we need to invest in freezers, where do we need to invest in having enough space on our normal cold rooms that are 2 to 8 Celsius, which is the normal temperature where we normally store some of the pharmaceutical products and traditional vaccines. But we really need to, and have already done a lot of investments in different countries based on the different requirements.
And how has the week gone? And before you answer that question, has there ever been sort of such a high-profile, highly anticipated, large rollout of a shipment of one particular type before? Is this something that you've done before, or is this new territory for you and other companies? Never? Never.
This is unprecedented. This is something new to everybody. I mean, the volumes, as I mentioned, are huge. The coordination between the different stakeholders, it's super important, and that's what we have been learning lately. This week, of course, is a very important week for the world, not only for DHL, but for all of us. We received the news that one of the vaccines has been approved, and probably today we get news about another vaccine being approved, and we will expect the same happening next year in Q1 and Q2. So as soon as these vaccines are approved, you can imagine the amount of work behind the scenes that we need to do to get ready, right? We have planes ready. We have our people at origin, destination, working closely with the different public sector stakeholders, private sector, NGOs. Everything, needs to be coordinated very well. We cannot afford to lose vaccines. It will happen at some point that you have some vaccines that need to be destroyed because the efficacy is not maintained because the temperature has any excursions. But we would like to try to avoid that as much as possible and really provide an end-to-end solution that is clean and working like a clock.
How has the week gone?
The week has been busy, as you can imagine. Very interesting. Yeah, we don't stop. It's 24/7. Everyone in the different countries working closely with our customers. And also, I don't know if you heard the news, but last week, DHL shipped the first shipment of vaccines to Israel. That was our first shipment. So it was really interesting. So this week is busy, but we have been busy in the previous weeks as well, and we expect a very busy year next year.
I mean, this is, I would imagine, one of your busiest weeks of the year in any year. To have this layered on top of the week before the holidays or the week during the holidays for some, how has that been? How have you been able to manage that?
Well, we as I said, we have been planning for this for the past 6 months. Yeah. So it has not been that difficult, right? Of course, it is a lot of work. It is, we have to be on top of things, making sure that everything is ready. But I would say, we were ready for this. It's not taking us by surprise. And we're not shipping this week and next week is not going to be huge volumes, right? Because the huge volumes, we will see them next year, not this year. But we're shipping here or there, preparing for some countries would like to receive the vaccine before the end of the year. So that's where we are working on, to make sure that we have everything ready. But again, it's not something that took us by surprise. We were prepared.
And how does this feel to you personally to be part of the system that's going to hopefully, for lack of a better word, save the world, or at least give a lot of people their existences back? What does that feel like to you?
Oh, we're super engaged and passionate. I am very happy, to be part of this solution of the crisis, right? Because it will impact everybody. It's not about the business itself. It's about how we, as DHL, and me as a person, of course, are part of this solution. So my team, the whole life sciences and healthcare team globally within DHL are very passionate about it. Our purpose is connecting people, improving lives. And now more than ever, we see that purpose in place, right? So we need to be there for humanity.
That's great. And my final question, just looking ahead, it seems as if dealing with COVID has taught everyone something, us in the conference business and the events business, medical device companies. What has DHL learned from not only the pandemic, but maybe the rollout of the vaccine, and how will that change how you work with your medtech and life sciences clients going forward?
Lots of different changes. First of all, the importance of having resilient supply chains, right? You need to be ready. There will be more crises coming. We need to be prepared. We learned a lot when the pandemic started, when the PPE started shipping and there was a chaos, no air freight capacity. Governments had to get engaged and involved in buying the PPE supplies, and there was not enough. And, there was a lot of different issues. So we're using those learnings for a future pandemic. The importance, again, of the collaboration between the public sector, authorities, politicians, the private sector, the NGOs, all the stakeholders that play an important role in this sector, right? That coordination is vital for the future. So that's one of the main learnings. We launched a white paper in collaboration with McKinsey back in September, talking about those learnings and also talking about how to prepare for the vaccine launch. And we're also learning, there will be new models, new business models arising from this. Let's talk about, direct to patient, for example. It was happening before the pandemic started, but now it is accelerated. Mm-hmm. You will see now you have a lot of patients being treated at home. You have the virtual consultations. That means that more patients would expect, their medicines or medical devices to arrive to their homes instead of them going to the doctor and buying, these products in the pharmacy. So that means that we need to develop, or we are already doing, developing new solutions to serve these new business models. So lots of things are changing, and I'm glad, right? Because it makes us innovate. Mm-hmm. And, DHL is a top leader. We have 3 different innovation centers in different parts of the world, one in Chicago, one in Bonn, and one in Singapore. And we are always, working on finding new solutions, talking to startup companies, academia, what's going on in terms of digitalization, robotics, let's talk about, more data analytics, artificial intelligence, all these things. Even though we have been working on this for many years, this is accelerated right now during the pandemic and in the future.
Well, I'm grateful to you and DHL for the work you're doing, and grateful to you specifically for taking some time out of what I'm sure is a really busy week. So thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
All right, it was great to hear from DHL. We haven't really talked much about logistics here on the podcast, so that's, I think, another area of interest we should continue to explore. But now let us resume with the top 10 mass device list, Chris, the top 10 Newmarkers, newsmakers.
Well, number 4 on the list was, unfortunately here in the Twin Cities where I live, we had, George Floyd dying under the knee of a police officer, and it was just a really, really terrible event in our community here. And Minneapolis also happens to be a major hub of the medical device industry, so I think it made the industry, more cognizant of these, problems of racism that we have in this country. We saw the industry, trying to do its part. But I know, Tom, you've covered that a lot of it. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, it has been interesting to watch, and you're right. A lot of the medtech CEOs and companies really took a strong stand early on. We talked with Kevin Lobo last week on the podcast, and Jeff Martha 2 weeks before that. In fact, I pulled out his quote that basically that medtech innovation is a people business, and people want to work for companies that stand for something, and he believes that means that Medtronic has to stand for change and diversity and inclusion. And that single post on LinkedIn just completely resonated with hundreds of people. We got a lot of likes and comments, and Jeff Martha's getting a lot of support for that stance. And he's not alone. We don't want to isolate or just suggest it's only Stryker or Medtronic. Boston Scientific, of course, has their own program that we covered earlier on, Closing the Gap. So it's been great to see, actually, I think, the industry's response. And we'll continue to track it. We'll actually hear from one of the founders of MedTech Color on the podcast in early January. We'll talk about their views on 2020, what can happen in 2021, and a pitch program that they're actually starting. So that'll be interesting to follow.
I mean, it says something that, the majority of top executives in our industry are pretty much still white guys. So, there's a lot to do. And, but it's at least heartening to hear, the leaders in our industry, actually speaking up and about values that we should have in our country. So, at least there's some hope there.
The issue has come through in some of the FDA advisory meetings about the diversity of the clinical trials. And I think both the Pfizer BioNTech and the Moderna trials have had to beef up their diversity numbers in their phase 3 trials. And I think they still face questions. Like in the Pfizer meeting last week, people were asking about the kind of dearth of data about Native Americans, for instance. So it's going to be an ongoing kind of, focus.
Yeah, that sounds good. Drugs and medical devices shouldn't just be safe for white people. So I think we should.
Great point. Yeah, that was something that Closing the Gap was the Boston Scientific program was working on as well. So great point, Brian. All right, let's move on to number 3.
All right, so number 3 was that Johnson & Johnson. They finally unveiled their new robot-assisted surgery system. This is a TAVA, which is a kind of Italian word, like higher volume, you're bringing things to a new level. 6 arms, provide more control and flexibility in surgery. But this is their bid to compete against Intuitive Surgical, which is the dominant player in the space. And Meanwhile, Medtronic last year, they unveiled their Hugo system. So Da Vinci has Intuitive, Intuitive has the Da Vinci robot. Medtronic has the Hugo robot. J&J has the Atava robot. You'll see how this heating up of competition goes in the robot-assisted surgery space.
All right. Well, let's carry on the list through number 2. We'll have our final interview. I'm sorry, through number 1, we'll have our final interview, and then we'll come back with our predictions for 2021. So what's number 2, Chris?
Number 2 on the list is that Medtronic has embarked on a major reorganization this year. This is going to be, there's predicted annual savings of, around $500 million by, 2023. The idea is to really, cut through the corporate bureaucracy and separate the company out into 20 empowered operating units. But I know we had their new CEO Jeff Martha on just in a recent podcast, and I remember he spoke a lot with you about it. Tom. I mean, I encourage people to go back and listen to that interview. But what were some of the big things you heard from Martha?
Well, I mean, it's and you and I have talked about it before. Medtronic's desire to be nimble and to move quickly, and they really see splitting the larger company down into 20 smaller operating units is going to allow them to take HQ out of a lot of the decisions and really localize it and give the smaller businesses the focus and the authority to move quickly. And they want to continue to grow. And Martha's big on competition. He wants Medtronic to take a hold of a market and or create a market and hold on to it and not to cede it so quickly to competitors. So.
I thought it was cool too. Like Raj Denhoy at Jefferies, called this turning the battleship. Right? It's the largest medical device company in the world. He wants to kind of turn this battleship and make the company more nimble. So good wishes to them. We'll see how that goes.
Exactly. All right. And now let's get to the number 1 item, the number 1 Newmarker's Newsmakers of the year.
Well, number 1, obvious. COVID-19, and what MedTech's been doing to respond to COVID-19. So many stories. It's
been quite a trip going back to the spring. I mean, even looking back at earlier podcasts where we had MedTech Goes to War, and we talked to Raj about the impact of DPA and whether that was going to be a player, and of course the push for ventilators and Medtronic's making the Puritan plans available. I mean, seems like it was 5 years ago when this happened. It was only 5 months ago.
Yeah.
It's been a long year. Brian, I mean, you were not with us at Mass Device and the pharma pages yet, but what's your take from this year in medtech and COVID-19?
I mean, you have this huge push with companies ranging from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, J&J, as Chris mentioned, Gilead, that are all kind of involved in creating therapeutics or vaccines for COVID-19. And I think one thing to watch in 2021 is you have this ongoing kind of focus on drug pricing reform. And it kind of stands to reason that some of these companies are going to use their work on the pandemic to play that card, if you will, to help kind of talk to politicians about the kind of angle about they're saving lives, they're helping battle the pandemic. So I think we'll see more of that next year as some of these companies will kind of play up their work in developing therapeutics and vaccines to use that in their favor to say we're helping save lives and helping to battle the COVID-19 situation.
That's a really good point, Brian. I think the pandemic has really improved the public image of pharma and medical device companies, and that just, that it certainly can't hurt them as, Congress looks at pricing reform or what regulation or whatnot in coming years.
All right, thanks, guys. Now let's start our third keynote conversation. I had the chance to speak with Dr. Eric Eskioğlu. He is the Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at Novant Health. Novant started vaccinating its nurses and doctors yesterday. Let's listen. Well, Eric Eskioğlu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thanks for having me.
We were just talking before I pushed record. This has been a great day at your health system, Novant. Why don't you tell us first just a little bit about the organization you work for so folks know who you are and who you're helping?
Absolutely. We are a $6 billion integrated multi-state healthcare system that has 17 hospitals and over 650 care sites, and we take care of about 5 million patients a year. So very large footprint in the Carolinas mainly, but also in Virginia as well, Northern Virginia as well.
And in a word or two, how would you describe 2020?
2020 is something we all would like to put us behind. It's been a challenge. Our system has done terrifically well, both taking care of COVID patients, but also at the same time taking care of our patients that have other needs. And we can't forget that. That's about 98% of our patients have other needs. And unfortunately, that's been the bigger story is how do we do both at the same time and be effective and not worry about PPEs and not worry about testing. And, we've gone through 3 surges. Mm-hmm. The first one was in April, May. We shut down all our clinics for about 6 weeks. And we did have high numbers, but we learned a lot from that experience. We learned from the experience of, unfortunately, New York City and other areas that had the surge first. Then we started being able to take care of the patients at the same time, taking care of COVID patients. Unfortunately, we hit another peak, what I would say maybe a higher climb back in June and July. And we got through that. And now, to me, it feels like we're scaling the Himalayas, the way the peak has come about. And unfortunately, this time, it's not just pockets in the country, it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing this from all my colleagues around the country, all the other CMOs I talk to. And it's hit us all at the same time. And the vaccine couldn't have come soon enough. I'm really excited. We're in the process of not only scaling the Himalayas to get it to the other side of this peak. And unfortunately, Thanksgiving didn't help us. And we expect the same effect after Christmas when people get together and they want to celebrate. I understand. But right now, if we can just hold off for one more time, I think we'll be on the other side. But we're trying to operationalize as a country and ourselves as a healthcare system, also the most complicated vaccine delivery history in the history of mankind. Mm-hmm. And that is a challenge all by itself. I'm proud of the way our pharmacy teams have reacted to this. I'm proud of the way our supply and chain have reacted to this. And we're proud to be able to hopefully inoculate our frontline team members real quickly so we can get to our patients. That's my biggest goal is quickly get to our patients so we can get them inoculated with this vaccine.
Well, I know everybody listening to this podcast is grateful for the efforts of yourself and your colleagues and all healthcare professionals, not only for what you do for COVID, but, medtech folks deal with healthcare folks all the time. It's why we're in it. I think we're all pushing toward the same objective. So thank you on behalf of everyone who is listening. You had mentioned it before I push record that this is a bit of an emotional day. It's actually the day you've started vaccinating people. Tell us, set the scene for me a little bit. What has the day been like? And what is it that you're feeling? What made you feel emotional?
So we were tracking our shipments, and we started getting our shipments in 3 of our hospitals today. And I still get goosebumps talking about it. And we had identified our first two frontline employees. One was an ICU nurse, a phenomenal nurse, Diana, and Dr. Sam Doherty-Hafer, who's our intensivist. And they've been in the trenches for months now with no end and no time off. And they've been just working endlessly and tirelessly. So those are the first 2 we identified. And when I went there, I thought I was going to keep it composed. When I saw that shot going into Diana's arm and Dr. Doherty-Hafer's arm, I really choked up, because this is what we've been waiting for. And this is how we're going to hopefully be able to beat this. Now, people are asking me as the chief medical officer, are you getting your shot first? And I'm like, absolutely not. I will wait for my turn. And when my turn comes, I will take it. But I want our frontline employees, our clinicians, our nurses who are in the trenches to get it first. But I will tell you one thing. If you get a shot, take it. And I will. It's a basketball analogy, but I will. When I get a shot, I'm going to take it. My wife is going to take it. We know this vaccine is about 90 to 95% effective, which is, when you compare it to our flu vaccines, which are only about 40 to 45% effective, tremendous effectiveness. And the paper that came out of Germany 2 days ago also has shown that the Pfizer vaccine, the BioNT vaccine, is also effective against 19 variations of this virus, which is really good news. So even the mutations seems to be not affected by the vaccine. The vaccine can take on the mutations like nothing else. So really excited about this.
Your CMO, these healthcare professionals, these nurses, these are your frontline troops. These are your people you're responsible for. What has it been like this past year, sending them every day into conflict or contact with something that could really harm them or kill them?
It's been definitely emotional. And, I can't thank them enough, all our frontline nurses and physicians. I actually put myself on the list when the surge comes, and if I need to be there, I can do critical care. So I put myself on the list to be able to help out and do my part if it's needed. And it's, again, every time we felt like we were over a surge, another one came up, and this is the 3rd one. And it's almost like, oh no, not again. It's that feeling of defeat and the feeling of how are we going to get over this. But today, for the first time, we have a hope, a big hope. And again, I can't stress to you, we have to inoculate every one of our frontline heroes, the nurses, the doctors, the nurse practitioners, the physician's assistants who are in the trenches first, to get them safe first. We need to make sure that they're safe. And then moving forward, let's just go out after our most vulnerable patients. I have an 80-year-old mom. She's anxiously awaiting her vaccination. She asked me yesterday, when am I going to get my vaccination? Mom, in due time, just continue your precautions, wearing a mask, minimize your interactions with your friends, don't go out. And but as a country, we're ready. We're ready to move out of this and move on with our lives. And I couldn't be any happier for this vaccine to reach to us. And we owe a great amount of gratitude to both Pfizer, but also the BioNT company out of Germany for getting us out of this.
Just the final question, and I'll let you go. You mentioned Thanksgiving, and we knew if people got together, there'd be a surge. They did, or some did. We've seen the surge. If you want to articulate one more time, any requests to folks who are listening about the holidays?
Yeah, I want to articulate to everybody that please, I'm really asking you, do not congregate, even with families. It's hard. I know we all miss our loved ones, especially this time of the year is when we get together. But I would still use a lot of caution. Unless you really have to go, I wouldn't get together with family members, except for your nucleus that you're in the house with. If you have to go out, wear a mask at all times, regardless of even if you're in your family member's house. Keep your distance 6 feet. And please avoid eating with your mask, even in restaurants. It's a hard task, I know, but right now is not the time to relax. I would say the light at the end of the tunnel is here. Just give us a couple more months, and as a nation, we're going to get through this. We're a very strong nation, and we're going to get through this. But just hang in there. This is a public health emergency. This is not a political statement. Just hang in there for 2 more months, 3 more months, and we're going to get out of this as a country.
Excellent. Great points, Eric. Well, thank you again for everything you've done and to your entire team. And thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me from Novant Health. Really appreciate it, Tom. Have a great day and be safe.
All right, and we're back. We've concluded our interviews. We've covered the top 10 Newmarkers Newsmakers of the Year. Now is the time for our bold predictions for 2021. Brian, you are in the visiting clubhouse, so we'll let you go first. What do you see as being one of the big news items for 2021 in medtech or pharma?
So in 2021, you'll see significant progress towards building out connected health data infrastructure. So as you know, there's been this prediction for decades that you'll have like this kind of like remote patient care model that will take off. And for whatever reason, it's been slower to kind of roll out than a lot of people have anticipated. But with COVID-19, obviously, you have more remote clinical trials. You have more patients that are kind of like in their homes that don't want to venture out to go to the hospital or a doctor. So I think you'll see more nimble data gathering. And one thing that I saw just yesterday was there was an EY study saying that 81% of clinical trial professionals were concerned about patient availability. And then you had this like massive amount that they projected of loss from clinical trials that are being delayed or what have you. So I think you'll see a big push to be able to build out that data infrastructure. Because I think right now, going back to that theme of HIPAA and things like that, they don't have, a lot of clinical trial folks don't have like the pipes to be able to get kind of secure data, private data from people's homes to run clinical trials. So I think you'll see progress there.
COVID's been a big catalyst for a lot of things, so hopefully it'll jumpstart that effort, which has been going on for a while. You're right. Chris Newmarker, what does 2021 look like to you?
You know what? I think there's going to be another big M&A deal. I think that's an easy bet. You know, and the good thing is, even if I'm wrong, no one's going to remember. So, but I think, you know, I just think, especially after a year like this, that you know, companies are really going to be looking at like, okay, where do we go going forward? And, you know, the consolidation, healthcare is continuing. That's like push for consolidation of the device space. It'll be interesting who's going to have the big, giant, multi-billion-dollar, you know, merger, you know, next year. We'll see. But that's my rolling of the dice.
You son of a gun. That was mine. I'm anticipating that. Honestly, I think there's a lot of private equity money out there that's going to be looking for M&A deals. I think there are a lot of companies that have had their budgets realigned by COVID-19, have cut their travel budgets, found new efficient ways to operate. And I think I just think that's sort of, when you have a lot of money.
No-brainer.
And a lot of companies that are, you know, or maybe a lot of CEOs who are kind of looking to get out of this game. I'm with you 100%, Chris. I think it's going to be a huge M&A year next year. So
I wonder what the role this kind of growing antitrust sentiment might have, if any, on the life sciences space. So you have like a lot of pressure in companies like Google and Facebook now that has not really been strong until recently. So that's building. Maybe that will come to other sectors. Who knows?
You know, Stryker, to get the right deal, had to spin off stuff to DJO, you know, to get it done. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning, The Daily, the New York Times podcast, and they were talking about the Facebook deal. And it got me thinking, you're right, Brian, like Facebook has this quote unquote monopoly on whatever they're able to do. But what do you say to a company that has the only this kind of implant or that kind of implant? How does this carry over to medtech? If there's an increased concern about antitrust, how far can this go?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it'll have any impact on M&A going forward, but that's a great point. That's certainly something to watch.
Yeah,
so.
I'm totally making this up, but you know, if Medtronic said we're going to buy Stryker, yeah, what are they going to say about that? Like, oh, so you want to make everything? You know, I mean, yeah, it's.
Hold on, I'm tweeting this right now. Newmarker says
right.
Medtronic.
Medtronic's going to buy Stryker. No, that was just an example. No.
This is just a podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
It's a podcast, right? Hey, I got one more, Tom.
All right, since you stole mine, you give me your backup, because I don't have a backup for myself, Chris.
I'm really interested to see what happens with renal denervation next year, and gosh, Brian, I mean we covered that together back in our QMed days at UBM. I mean, that was a huge. It was a failure. I mean, everybody was saying like this was going to be the next big thing. It's going to be so great. We're going to, zap a nerve and it'll control blood pressure instead of people having to use pharmaceuticals. And years go by, and here we are again. And Medtronic is saying, hey, I think we've figured out how to clear up some of the problems we had in previous studies. And, I know Jeff Martha was saying earlier this year, they were, resuming, studies around it. And yeah, I mean, if they've figured it out like they say they have, I mean.
I remember the early data was not as impressive as they had hoped.
Well, what's interesting is I was at JP Morgan when JP Morgan when first Medtronic announced they'd buy Ardian. That was back in 2011. And then I was there again when they released the early Simplicity data. And I was in the front row of the breakout room, across from the large ballroom there, whose name I can't remember. And I was in the front row behind me. The immediately row behind me were the guys from the Foundry who had founded Ardian, and they were not happy with the results because they didn't think that the trial was done as well as it might have been. And I think maybe the redo bore out their concerns a bit that there actually was more good news that was evident anyway in 2014. So I kind of, like everyone else, said, "Oh, that's a shame." And stop paying attention. No, they definitely see this as the next big thing. And going way back to Ardian, I also think this was sort of one of the last examples of the Me Too investing that went in with medtech VCs. Because at the time, everyone had to have a renal innovation program. All the bigs had one. Covidian had one. And the moment that data came out in 2014, everyone just shut down their startups or their programs and just said, "No, we don't need to have that anymore." And you don't really see that as much, where everyone seems to have this kind of tech or that kind of tech. So I think Ardian going back is going to be proven to be one of the more influential, I think, investments and stories in medtech. And I'm optimistic and very hopeful that it turns out to be a positive story for patients as well. I'm sure it will.
Yeah.
Be. There's been a similar story in the drug space with Biogen's Alzheimer's drug, which had kind of like mixed phase 3 data. And I think there was some sentiment that FDA, like the advisory committee, would have a positive kind of review of it earlier this year, I think in November. And long story short, they didn't. So it caused the company's shares instead. But there's not been like a new promising Alzheimer's drug in about 2 decades. So will be interesting to watch that space as well.
Excellent. Well, this has been a great conversation. It's been a great year. Chris, you and I launched this podcast in March. Since then, someone or someone's has pushed the play button 40,000 times.
Awesome.
So, it's great. It's a great way to, at this time we're all shut in. I'm looking at the cold snow outside in Massachusetts. It's kind of a nice symbol of what 2020 has been like, just kind of cold and alone. But this podcast has really helped us kind of connect, I think, with each other, but also most importantly with the medtech community at large. It's been great to tell these stories. It's been great to have people hear these stories. And I don't know, any takeaway from your podcast time, Chris?
No, this is this has been really fun. I get tons of great feedback on LinkedIn about what we do and in general about what we're doing. And this is just it's good to hang around and chat with you every week, man. This is great. I'm looking forward to doing this next year.
Absolutely. We'll have a few changes. We'll try to continue to make the podcast fresh and fun to listen to. Brian, you've been a great addition to this episode, and we're definitely going to invest the $30 and get you a nice headset so you can sound as crisp and clear as Chris do. But we can't wait to have you back. And thanks to everyone who has pushed play and everyone who's listened and who's joined us.
Yeah.
This has been a rough year for not just medtech, for the world, but we're hopeful, as we've talked about today, the vaccine, that things are gonna get better, and hopefully we'll all see each other in October at DeviceTalks Boston, and October 4th and 5th.
DeviceTalks Boston.
Woo! First rounds on Newmarker.
Oh wait, man!
If you're one of the 40,000, just ask Chris for a drink. He'll take care of you. But, well, that's it. That's a wrap. Happy holidays to folks who are either enjoying the holidays currently or plan to enjoy the holidays in the coming weeks. And, of course, nothing but peace and joy in 2021. That's all I got.
Happy holidays to you and your family, and stay safe.